Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this webcast today, hosted by Northern Micro and sponsored by Dell Technologies. Today, we're doing a thought leadership event based on pandemic fighting technology and the reinvention of institutions in the second era of the digital age. Today, we have a very special guest speaker. Don Tapscott is the co-founder and executive chairman of Blockchain Research Institute. He's a world-leading authority on the impact of technology on society and business and governments for that matter. He is the author of 16 books, including Wikinomics and the Blockchain Revolution, and a member of the Order of Canada. We could go on and on about his many accomplishments. He's also a very accomplished musician, and we're thrilled to have him here today presenting to this group of technologists. Don, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Emily, and I'm delighted to be here, as it were, today. And let me begin by saying I hope that you're all safe and that you're well, and that you're appropriately squirreled away somewhere for this Canadian Thanksgiving, although I know we have people from other countries attending. Let's just step back for a bit and think about the situation we find ourselves. The world is one troubled place right now, and a lot of it has to do with COVID-19. And to me, this is really a turning point in human history. The economic costs are devastating on a scale perhaps never seen in modern history, and the human costs at this point are unfathomable. And the pandemic will cause some very profound changes to our economy, our behavior, our society, and our governments. Some leaders and governments that failed the challenge will be replaced, as they should. And many institutions will be scrutinized, hopefully changed for the better. And the pandemic intersects with the digital age in a number of very profound ways. To begin, it's enabled new ways of doing things, working from home, online shopping, learning, entertainment. All these things have been accelerated by a decade or decades. And it's also caused a whole number of problems. For example, fragmenting public discourse. And this enables shucksters to challenge basic science and prevent an effective response. And the pandemic has also revealed some very deep technological weaknesses in our systems for innovation and commerce, in our supply chains, systems for medical data. And finally, the increased transparency of the digital age has revealed a whole number of deep problems in society with sort of searing clarity as the virus harms poor people, racial minorities, indigenous people, and others, and more than the rest of us. And so we all need to think really big here. And when the dust settles, as it surely will, it's my view that our behavior and our institutions and our systems will change very profoundly. It's just a shot of a street of Toronto right now. Things are kind of quiet. And what I'd like to do is to talk to you today, frankly, about not what I think will change, because I'm of the view that the future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved, and what we need to do. And I'm going to share with you some of the insights from the research that we've been conducting here at the Blockchain Research Institute. I'd like to make the case that we're entering a second era of the digital age, and that this technology provides profound opportunities for fighting pandemics. But it's also the intersection of the pandemic and digital is also going to and should lead to very profound changes in the nature of the corporation and in the nature of government, not just government operations, but in the nature of democracy itself. So that's a tall order. I'm going to speak for another 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to get into an open conversation. And I hope that you'll feel free to ask questions, disagree, or whatever else. This won't be a debate, thankfully, like the ones that we've been watching in the United States these days, if you can call them that. But we will have a good discussion. So let's start. Let me just begin with a little background. I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. I think my mother bought most of the copies. But in the early 90s, I started writing some bestsellers. Paradigm Shift, it's obviously a big book, in 93. And The Digital Economy was the first bestseller about the web and business. And I had to write the 20th anniversary of the book a few years ago, and I started wondering, well, where have we been and where are we going? And I came to the conclusion that we're really entering a second era of the digital age. We've been through mainframes, mini computers, PCs, the internet, the web, mobile web, social media, the cloud, big data. And now technology is infusing itself into everything, into the physical world with billions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. I had a friend in Toronto, everything in his house had electrical power, had an IP address. This was several years ago. And all these things speak to each other. I have no idea what his refrigerator says to his toaster. Apparently, they have meaningful conversations. They may be friends. Friends with benefits? Ooh. Anyway, actually, he was bragging that his fence was talking to a sprinkler system. And I said, well, Kim, why would you care? And he said, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. So this is devices interacting and communicating. Pretty soon they'll be doing transactions. We have technologies that learn how to do things that they weren't programmed to learn, and so on. And I found myself coming to a surprising conclusion that the foundational technology for the second era was, in fact, the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies, or blockchain. Blockchain. Now, it's not the most sonorous word in the world, but to me, this is the second era of the internet. So let me take a minute to explain that. For the first era, 40 years now, we've had an internet of information. But when I send you some information, an email, PDF of this deck, whatever, I'm actually not sending you information. I'm sending you a copy. And that works great for information. But when it comes to assets, things that companies and governments really care about, things like money and intellectual property and securities and stocks and bonds and the data in our identities, even cultural assets like art or music or votes. A vote is an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. Copying those is not a good idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money. Right? So cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for a long time. And the way we manage this problem in our economy is through intermediaries, banks, credit card companies, governments, social media companies, stock exchanges, transfer agents, and so on. They provide all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the party, you are, Emily. They clear and settle transactions, and they keep records. And overall, they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. They're all centralized. That means that they can be hacked. There are two types of central computer systems, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. They slow things down. Why does it take 4 to 7 days for a remittance from a housekeeper in Toronto to go to her mom in Manila? And why is she charged 10 to 20% for that? A big problem is that they capture our data. And that means that we can't use this data to plan our lives. We can't monetize it, and our privacy is being undermined. So, what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast global distributed ledger, or anything of value, from money to securities to intellectual property to votes, could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way, peer to peer. Well, that's what Bitcoin started 2008, an anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper solving the double spend problem. And he created this new machine currency called Bitcoin. Now, don't be confused by Bitcoin. Sure, it has some use cases, but the real underlying pony here is this underlying blockchain technology. Because for the first time in human history, people can trust each other, and trust is not achieved by an intermediary or a government or something. It's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code, which is why at the BRI we call it the trust protocol. This is the first native digital medium for trust. Now, I thought I had a great analogy on why blockchains were so secure. But John Oliver on late night TV had some fun with it. So I'm actually going to play it for you now. You'll see why I don't use the analogy anymore.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
My body is whole, but what of my soul? So you can see why I don't use the analogy anymore. Still think it's a pretty good analogy, though. Anyway, so I did get lucky with the timing on this book. I also got lucky with my co-author, and it did become the big book on the topic. And the promise here is that with an internet of value, we can create a more decentralized, open, secure, transparent, and just world. And this is going to lead to transformation of many industries, of supply chains, and of government. So let me try and make the case for you on that. And I'm going to begin by talking about what's the elephant that's it's actually in the room and we can all see it. And that's the pandemic. So here we have COVID-19. And the impact, as we've discussed, is absolutely devastating. Why did this happen? Well, it has a lot to do with weaknesses in our systems and technology. It has a lot to do with weaknesses in leadership in many parts of the world as well, and in the systems for public health and government. But let's get into it a bit. Now, our first one is supply chains. How can it be that we can't get a paper mask to a frontline worker for when this started for weeks, that there's a problem manufacturing and getting ventilators out to hospitals? How can it be that we have hoarding in this time when supply chain, surely through transparency, would give people the confidence to know that there's stuff coming? Well, our supply chains are based on traditional systems. And they have a whole number of problems. And our conclusion at the BRI is that supply chains are really going to become based on this new technology in the second era. Now, blockchain's fundamental to this, but also AI and the Internet of Things and robots and drones and all the other technologies that I mentioned are central here. So think about it. You have supply chains. It's a $50 trillion business. There are trains and boats and planes and trucks and escrow agents and various suppliers and partners and tax authorities and borders and immigration and customs people. And they're using all these traditional technologies like EDI and ERP and so on. There's fax, there's a lot of emails and phone calls, and even paper is still everywhere. What if all of that were a single shared network state, global ledger, where real time, everyone could see what was happening, where there were real time transactions, where we could have smart payments through smart contracts built into the supply chain. Smart contracts are just like what they sound like. They're contracts that self-execute and self-police themselves. Things would happen automatically. There would be no 3-day payment period because a payment and a settlement would be the same thing. It's just a change in the ledger. A state machine. Well, we could think about supply chains moving to something that we call asset chains, where the flow of digital assets becomes a real-time thing with great transparency. Now, how could this work in a pandemic? Well, for starters, we could have tracking and procuring of medical supplies. We could have the authenticity of assets. We could know that a ventilator is actually a valid ventilator. We could look at its provenance and know how it's moved through the whole supply chain. All of the issues of logistics, transport, and custody could be transformed. So as part of, we have a big series of events coming up called globalblockchainweek.org. And I just a couple of days ago pre-interviewed the president of FedEx along with the legendary CIO, Rob Carter, who's been there for 20 years. They were talking about how they created the chain of custody idea, and that's how FedEx was built. But now they're going to transform that once again around blockchain. Well, then they'll not only know about where's a package, they'll know everything about the package, its temperature. They'll be able to understand its provenance very quickly. They may even know what's in the package at a border, or they'll be able to authenticate that it's something that it meets Homeland Security requirements and so on. Now, we could also do things like additive manufacturing as well. There's a company called Veritex now that's 3D printing ventilators in hospitals, and they use blockchain as a transactional platform for that. Then let's think about something like hoarding. Why do we have hoarding? Well, hoarding comes from fear, and it comes from weaknesses in the supply chain. It comes from lack of transparency too. Right now, there's a shortage in Canada for paper towels, which may not be a bad thing because I don't know about you, but around here, we're just using fewer paper towels. But you're not going to buy 3 years of paper towels if you know that there are paper towels coming, if you have transparency into the supply chain. And these are some of the kinds of benefits that blockchain can achieve. Now, the first book to talk about that, is called Supply Chain Revolution. And it's been out a couple of months. It debuted as the #1 book in the commerce category on Amazon.com. So do pick up a copy.